Imagine living a perfect marriage, but only on the surface. Daniel, a multimillionaire, seems to have it all: success, power, and a wife who accompanies him to glamorous events. But behind the rehearsed smiles, there is a lost man, searching for something that even he didn't know was missing. Until, in an unexpected encounter, an ordinary woman with disarming sincerity turns his world upside down. What would you do if you were faced with the chance to start over, but had to destroy everything you built? Daniel is about to discover that true love requires more than courage. It requires honesty. And that, sometimes, is the biggest risk we can take. Stay tuned. This is a story of choices, twists and turns, and the power to change everything. Daniel, please adjust your tie. We can't be late for the gala event, and you're looking sloppy, Gabriella said, without even looking at him. She was busy adjusting her earrings in front of the mirror, while her long, flawless dress reflected the effort she put into every detail. He sighed, tugging at his tie half-heartedly. Of course, because nothing screams happy marriage like a perfectly fitted tie. Don't start, Daniel. You know we have an image to maintain. Daniel looked at her for a few seconds, but decided not to respond. He picked up his jacket, threw it over his shoulder, and headed to the car. During the trip to the event, the silence between the two was deafening. Gabriella was busy checking notifications on her cell phone while he looked out the window, lost in thought. When they arrived at the scene, flashes blinded them. Perfectly rehearsed smiles took over their faces as photographers surrounded them. Perfect as always, whispered a photographer, making Gabriella smile even more. Inside the luxurious hall, Daniel felt the air become heavy. Every face around him felt like a mask, and he laughed humorlessly when he realized that his own was too. I'm going to get a drink, he told Gabriella, but she was already engaged in a lively conversation with a group of socialites. He walked to the bar and ordered a double whiskey. As he drank, he observed his surroundings. The hall was impeccably decorated, but there was something artificial about it all, as if it were a set up for a theater of appearances. It was then that he noticed a woman adjusting flowers in one of the arrangements. She didn't look like a guest. She wore simple, practical clothes, but there was something about her that caught your attention. Maybe it was the way she smiled to herself, as she fiddled with the details of the arrangement, as if she were immune to the superficiality around her. You don't look very comfortable here, he commented, approaching slowly. She turned, surprised, but not intimidated. And you look like it, he replied with an amused smile. Daniel laughed for the first time that night. It hit the right spot. So, why are you here? She asked, arranging a rose in the arrangement. Obligations, appearances? Both, he confessed, without thinking. And you? I am working. Someone has to make this place seem as perfect as you pretend it is. The comment took him by surprise. He could have felt offended, but instead her bluntness made him laugh again. Well, congratulations. It's working. Thanks, I guess. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more false paradises to create. She picked up a pair of pruning shears and walked away, concentrating on her work. Daniel watched her, intrigued. That brief interaction had made an impression on him. Who was that woman, and why did he look so different from everyone else there? He returned to Gabriella, who was now talking about a charity auction with her friends. Daniel smiled at the right people and responded politely when asked, but his mind remained stuck on that woman adjusting flowers as if she were the only authentic person in that room. For the first time in years, he felt a mix of curiosity and lightness. Something in him had changed in that interaction, and he couldn't explain exactly why. In the days following the event, Daniel realized something that bothered him deeply. He couldn't get Elisa out of his mind. It wasn't just her conversation or her sharp humor, but the feeling of authenticity he hadn't experienced in years. She seemed real in a world where everything was carefully staged. As he reviewed contracts in the office, his thoughts returned to that brief encounter. He huffed and leaned back in his chair. "You're distracted today," commented Clara, his assistant, placing a stack of documents on the table. "I'm not distracted," he replied, without much conviction. Clara arched an eyebrow. "Then why are you signing the same document for the third time?" Daniel looked at the sheet in front of him and realized she was right. Sighing, he set the pen aside. "Maybe I am. Just something I can't get out of my head." "Want some advice? Stop trying to solve everything at work. Sometimes the answer lies elsewhere," said Clara, leaving with an enigmatic smile. At the end of the day, Daniel decided to leave early. He was walking down the street, lost in thought, when he saw a cozy cafe. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread seemed to invite him in. To his surprise, there was Elisa, sitting at a table near the window. She was immersed in a book, with an expression so concentrated that she seemed not to notice the movement around her. He hesitated for a moment, but something urged him closer. "This is getting weird," he said, stopping by the table. Elisa looked up, surprised. "What? My coffee or you following me?" "I'm not following you," he replied, laughing. "It was a coincidence. If you say so," she replied, smiling. "Do you want to sit down, or are you going to continue looking like a weird stranger standing there?" Daniel pulled out the chair and sat down. The conversation started out relaxed, but soon got deeper. Elisa seemed to have a special talent for asking questions that poked at the most hidden layers of the soul. "What do you really want in life?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. It was a simple question, but the answer seemed impossible. "I guess I'm still trying to figure it out." Elisa shrugged with an understanding smile. "Well, good luck with that. Just don't let other people's expectations decide for you." Daniel remained silent, reflecting on those words. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was being challenged in a way he had never experienced. Daniel woke up the next day with increasing discomfort. Elisa's words at the cafe kept echoing in her mind. "Don't let other people's expectations decide for you." It seemed simple, but for him it was a maze with no way out. During breakfast, Gabriella was focused on her cell phone, as usual. "Did you hear what I said?" he asked, trying to get her attention. "Of course, darling. What was it again?" She didn't even look up from the screen. "I was thinking we should talk more about ourselves, about what's working and what's not." Gabriella finally looked at him, clearly irritated. "Daniel, please. You know we have an investor dinner tonight. Can we talk about this later?" He took a deep breath. "Then never comes, Gabriella. Have you noticed that yet? If it's that important, make an appointment. My schedule is full," she said with a sarcastic smile before going back to her cell phone. Daniel felt the weight of the failed conversation. The emptiness he had been feeling seemed even greater. At work, his productivity was also falling. Clara, his assistant, entered the office with more documents and noticed his expression. "You look terrible. Is it the wedding or something else?" He looked up, surprised. "Like you. You're an open book, Daniel," she replied. "Whatever it is, you need to deal with it before it starts to affect everything." Later that day, Daniel decided to look for Elisa. He didn't know exactly what to say, but he felt like he needed to see her. When he arrived at the cafe where he found her earlier, she was there again. This time, he approached with more hesitation. "You again?" said Elisa, without hiding her tone of surprise. "It's starting to feel like stalking." "I know it seems like it, but I needed to talk to you," he replied sincerely. Elisa closed the book she was reading and crossed her arms. "Okay, speak. I'm not sure how to put this, but..." He stopped, struggling to find the words. My marriage is in shambles, and you made me realize how trapped I am." Elisa was silent for a few seconds before responding. "And what are you going to do about it, Daniel? Because complaining won't change anything." He knew she was right, but he had no idea where to start. For the first time, he felt he was faced with an impossible choice. Daniel spent the next few days in deep reflection. Elisa's words were like a constant echo. Complaining won't change anything. He knew he needed to act, but each step seemed fraught with unpredictable consequences. It was then that he decided to look for Alvaro, his longtime friend and mentor, someone who always knew how to bring clarity to his dilemmas. Sitting in a discreet lounge, Daniel poured out his confusion into jumbled words. Alvaro listened patiently, without interrupting. "So let me get this straight," said Alvaro, when Daniel finally stopped to breathe. "Are you in an unhappy marriage? Met someone who made you question everything, but are you afraid to move the needle?" "In short, yes," Daniel replied, rubbing his face with his hands. "Daniel, you always had a knack for complicating things. Let's start with the basics. Do you love your wife?" Daniel was silent. It wasn't an easy answer, but he knew the truth was inescapable. "I don't know if I still love it. I respect Gabriela, but it's not love. No more." Alvaro took a sip of his drink and shook his head. "So why the hell are you still in this relationship? For shared equity? For the charity dinners?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe it's because of the fear of collapsing everything we've built together. Or maybe it's because you're afraid to really face yourself," Alvaro replied, looking directly at him. "If you want advice, be honest, with her and with himself." These words resonated deeply with Daniel. That same night, he decided to have an honest conversation with Gabriela. When he got home, he found her in the office, typing frantically on her laptop. "We need to talk," he said, with a tone that captured her attention. She closed the laptop and looked at it suspiciously. "That sounds serious." "It is serious. We can no longer ignore what is happening between us." Gabriela crossed her arms, defensive. "And what's going on, Daniel? We've been married for years, and things have always been like this." "But they shouldn't be like that," he replied. "I feel like we're just coexisting. This isn't fair to any of us." She was silent for a moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "You're in love with someone else, aren't you?" Daniel hesitated before responding. "I don't know if it's passion, but yes. I met someone who made me realize what I'm missing." Gabriela laughed, but it was an empty laugh. "I knew, but to be honest, Daniel, I'm not the same person I was when we got married either. Maybe it's time we admit this is over." Her words took him by surprise. He expected resistance, perhaps anger, but he found something that felt much truer: relief. Despite the pain, they both knew they were finally being honest. Daniel left the conversation with Gabriela feeling relieved, but also vulnerable. It was as if I were at the beginning of a new life, but without an instruction manual. The next morning, he made his final decision. He needed to find Elisa and tell her the truth. He didn't know if she would accept it, but he was willing to take the risk. He drove to the cafe where he last saw her, his hands nervously gripping the steering wheel. When he entered, there she was, sitting in the same place, with the same book in hand. This time, however, his expression seemed more closed, less receptive. He took a deep breath and approached. "I hope you have a good explanation this time," said Elisa, without looking up from her book. "I do," he replied, sitting down opposite her. "I talked to Gabriela. We are separating." Elisa looked up, surprised. "Is that so? Or is this another one of your empty promises?" "These are not empty promises, Elisa. I realized I was living a life that no longer made sense. And you helped me see that." She stared at him for a few seconds before closing the book with a sigh. "And what do you want from me, Daniel? Because I'm not going to be anyone's consolation prize. Daniel felt the weight of her words. "I don't want you to be that. I just want a chance to start something real. No lies, no secrets, just the truth." Elisa remained silent, evaluating each word. Finally, she said, "I'm not going to lie. This is not easy for me. But you were honest, and I respect that." "So what does this mean?" he asked cautiously. "It means we can try," replied Elisa, crossing her arms. "But don't expect it to be simple, Daniel. I am not simple." He smiled, feeling a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm not either. I think we're even." The following months were a challenge and a learning experience for both of them. Daniel, accustomed to a life of convention and control, had to adjust to Elisa's authenticity. She, on the other hand, tested his limits, making sure he was truly committed. "Do you really not know how to cook anything?" asked Elisa, as he tried to open a recipe on his cell phone. "I know how to make restaurant reservations. Does that count?" joked Daniel. "Of course, as long as it's for the restaurant in your kitchen," she replied, laughing. At the same time, Gabriella also found a new path. Determined to regain her identity, she opened her own consulting company, something she always wanted but never prioritized. Despite the hurt, she and Daniel managed to maintain a respectful relationship. One afternoon, Gabriella called Daniel, something he didn't expect. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "At least now I can be myself, and I hope you find that too." "Thank you, Gabriella," he replied, feeling genuinely happy for her. "I wish the same for you." As time passed, Daniel and Elisa strengthened their relationship. He learned to value the simple things, like sharing a leisurely breakfast or laughing at his own failures. She, in turn, saw in him a man who was finally learning to be true. On the 1-year anniversary of their separation, Daniel and Elisa went to a charity event together. As they watched the auction, Elisa commented, "Funny to think that this was the kind of place we met." "Funny to think that I used to pretend so much at these events," replied Daniel with a smile. "Now I just have to pretend I understand the moves." Elisa laughed. "Well, you are learning." As they walked through the room together, Daniel looked at her. For the first time in years, he felt exactly where he was supposed to be. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was all he wanted.